It's one of the busiest train facilities in the Western Hemisphere. It's the front door of the city.
This front door of New York wasn't always a busy maze. Once it was a grand monument to the city's aspirations, an architectural marvel that welcomed visitors to the city.
These great Beaux-Arts structures were really something to admire.
This space within the rotunda was that original space that you see in some of the historic photos, really actually one of the largest spaces ever built in New York City's public spaces.
It was extraordinary.
But over time, neglect took its toll. The station fell into disrepair, and then it was gone.
It wasn't until they tore it down that people realized what had happened. It's a bank of memories. It's your ancestry. It's your roots.
For years, the station was a dark, cramped, and chaotic mess. But today, New York is reclaiming its grand gateway.
I saw the place improve over the years. If you look around now, you wouldn't believe what it used to be like.
The respect they had for the old bones of that station, and they wanted that to be seen and to be part of the story.
Bringing that light, that air, that connectivity to the outside world is a really important aspect of the design, and it's really part of our long-term plan in the renovation of Penn Station.
Boarding train number 97.
When you tell people you're a conductor, they think that it's awesome. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week. We're the face of the railroad.
The biggest thing that I was told when I was brand new, if you're late, your office leaves without you.
The Long Island Railroad is North America's busiest commuter railroad, serving around 200,000 passengers every weekday across 947 daily trains with stops at 126 stations.
It's nice seeing the same people every morning and hearing their stories or where they're going.
We are the oldest commuter rail in North America operating under its original name. Last year, we carried 75.5 million customers.
Sometimes you're almost a therapist on the train for people, and they'll be bouncing stuff off of you. Maybe it might be a job interview they're going on and they want to practice a little, or they're studying for a big test and they just want someone to talk to calm them down a little bit. It wasn't really in the job description, but it actually happens more often than you might think.
Those conductors rack up more train trips than most of us will take in a lifetime.
6 a day times 5 is 30 a week, thousands.
Yes.
I'd say that's a good estimate, in the thousands.
More than 1,000 trains pass through the station each day. Long Island Railroad, Amtrak, and New Jersey Transit. And with them, 600,000 passengers navigate one of the busiest transit hubs in North America. But this isn't just about trains and crowds. It's a place where movement, connection, and history all converge under one roof. And Penn Station didn't always look like this. Decades ago, it was a grand architectural marvel, an icon of elegance and innovation. Penn Station was born out of necessity, a response to the growing demand for faster, more efficient travel. At the turn of the 20th century, the only way someone could get from New Jersey to Manhattan was by boat.
There were no bridges. If you wanted to come into Manhattan, you had to cross those rivers, and they were formidable, and you'd usually have to take a ferry.
Travelers heading from the west on the Pennsylvania Railroad had to stop in New Jersey, board a ferry, and cross the Hudson, hauling luggage and hoping the weather didn't cause delays.
You had this pandemonious atmosphere all the time, and you'd have to make sure your luggage is with you, and make sure your porter is with you, and make sure you can cross this thing safely. And then you got on the ferry, and if you were lucky, it was a pleasant ride across the Hudson. And if you weren't, it was an hour's ride on the River Styx.
Alexander Cosset, president of the Pennsylvania Railroad, saw the chaos firsthand.
Along with wanting a railroad station, he had a vision. He really wanted a monumental gateway. He wanted something that would reflect the power of the railroad.
Cosset, who was an engineer by training, envisioned a bold solution: tunnels under the Hudson River and a grand station in the heart of Manhattan, and he was determined to make it happen.
You couldn't take a steam-driven train underneath the tunnels and expect your passengers to be alive at the other end.
Steam power posed a serious challenge, but Cosset was undeterred. He looked to Europe for inspiration, and what he saw there changed everything.
There, on the banks of the Seine, was the new Gare d'Orsay, which was a beautiful railroad station. He also saw that trains were coming in, not powered by steam, but by electricity, so Paris had conquered it. And that became his aha moment. And he said, if those trains can run under the Seine, I can get my trains to run under the Hudson River.
The construction of Penn Station was a monumental feat of engineering, particularly the tunneling beneath the Hudson and East Rivers. The Pennsylvania Railroad built 6 tunnels for New York City's Penn Station, 2 beneath the Hudson and 4 under the East River.
Hudson River was a very difficult thing. It was very deep, the currents were strong, and it was wide. He really knew that he had a challenge on his hands. He decided on something called the shield method.
A giant metal cylinder pushed forward as they excavated the tunnels. Pressurized air kept water out, and cast iron rings reinforced the tunnel as it took shape. With the tunnels being built, the station also began to rise. More than 500 buildings, tenements, warehouses, factories were cleared across 28 acres. This was demolition on a scale the city had never seen. Brick by brick, entire blocks vanished, creating the blank slate needed to begin construction.
People would come by every day and see this. I mean, it was like they were digging down to China. It was an enormous undertaking.
Massive steam shovels and cranes worked around the clock, creating a cavern large enough to house 22 underground tracks and the station's foundation. But the station above ground wasn't just about size, it was about grandeur. For that, the Pennsylvania Railroad turned to McKim, Meade, and White.
They, at the time, were the premier architects of all that was big in this city.
They had built the Boston Public Library, the Lowe Memorial Library at Columbia University, the Washington Square Arch, and the second Madison Square Garden. Their task was to design not just a train station, but a monumental gateway that would rival the great train halls of Europe.
Charles McKim loved Rome. He loved the architecture. But one of the things he particularly liked was the ancient baths of Caracalla. And he thought one day, wouldn't it be wonderful to take that concept and use it someplace else?
The design called for 27,000 tons of steel, 500,000 cubic feet of granite, 83,000 square feet of skylights, and 17 million bricks.
They wanted to do a trial run of the electric trains going under the station, and they were a little ahead of themselves when they were doing this test. So they still had to use steam. So what they did is they put the locomotive in the back, and then they pushed it into Penn Station so people wouldn't be coughing and dying on them.
With all the tracks finally in place, the station opened its doors on November 27, 1910, a day that marked the beginning of a new era in transportation in New York City. But its creators never got to see it. Alexander Cossett died in 1906, just 4 years before the station's completion, and Charles McKim died in 1909, just a year before it opened.
The original station footprint, which Penn Station has the same footprint today, is on really a mega block here. It extends from 33rd Street in the north to 31st Street in the south, from 7th Avenue on the east side to 8th Avenue on the west side.
Its exterior was made of 490,000 cubic feet of Milford pink granite, brought in via rail from Massachusetts. They stretched over 2 city blocks with towering columns and intricate detailing that gave it a look of a Roman temple.
This is the pink granite. This is the exterior of Penn Station. This is what it looked like before it became elephant's hide gray. It is amazing to me that this is pink.
Inside, sunlight filtered through glass ceilings, illuminating the travertine marble walls and the vast great room.
Even if you never took a train from there, the steel and glass ceiling would catch the dust in the air. It was like the mournful sound of a train whistling in the night.
It was built with 2 different concourses. There was a boarding concourse and there was a separate concourse for departing passengers as well. There were grand entrances actually on the north and the south that don't exist anymore. There were special taxi lanes, special drop-off pickup areas. And one of the aspects of the original Penn Station was actually the boarding concourse was built, and you can see in a lot of historic photos, out of glass blocks. And I have one I can show you. And the whole purpose of these glass blocks was to be able to bring light down through that boarding concourse down to the exit concourse.
You could walk around the perimeter of Penn Station and it was all lit up. It was almost like walking into a film noir city. Good architecture moves the soul. If a 10-year-old kid can walk around into a station and have that feeling, then that building's a success.
But even monuments aren't immune to time. The same station that symbolized progress and grandeur would eventually face neglect, decline, and destruction. Coming up, the wrecking ball comes for Penn Station, and out of its ashes, a new chapter begins. Penn Station was a monumental achievement, a grand gateway to New York connecting the city like never before. But in 1917, the United States found itself entangled in World War I, and the federal government soon took over railroads to better manage the transportation of troops and supplies for the war effort.
Trains were federalized, and unfortunately it was not such a good idea because they all were not really well taken care of, and by the time the war was over, a lot of money had to be poured into the tracks.
By World War II, Penn Station regained its importance, becoming a poignant backdrop for emotional goodbyes and reunions as soldiers passed through its halls.
It was very much a place of solace. Servicemen going to war. A husband and wife had a few private moments before he left on one of the trains. And then, of course, there was the end of World War II. And that, unfortunately, was the beginning of the end of Pennsylvania Station.
Neglect and financial troubles laid the groundwork for its eventual deterioration. The station, once a proud architectural gem, suffered from years of deferred maintenance and neglect. The glass roof became grimy, rain leaked through broken windows.
That pristine pink went from a subdued gray to a motley, dirty-looking station. To the public who really didn't think about it, it was built on the edge of nowhere to them. It wasn't like Grand Central. Grand Central was in the middle of the city, and in 1955, an architect named Lester Tichy had decided to modernize the station, and he built this counter for getting your tickets, and it looked very much like a ticket counter at an airline terminal. And what it did is it blocked the main waiting room from the rest of the station.
The station had changed, but so had the country. The Federal Highways Act of 1956 fueled a nationwide boom in highway construction. Families embraced suburban life in developments like Levittown, and air travel was more reliable and accessible. Railroads faded into the background, becoming an afterthought for many travelers.
Through the 50s and 60s, with more air travel and the automobile becoming really more primary in many people's lives, rail travel was just less popular. The Pennsylvania Railroad, our predecessor at the time, really divested itself of the station building, sold off the air rights to a developer who subsequently built Penn Plaza, which is Madison Square Garden above us, and to Penn Plaza on the east side of the block. And the station itself remained. Everything under the sidewalks is still the same part of Penn Station.
Preservationists protested.
Not surprisingly, there were very few people who were upset about it. There was a small group of architects.
But public indifference sealed the station's fate.
And to most people on the street watching them picket, they looked at them, so you're picketing over a building? I was in the city and I didn't react until it was gone. It was so far removed from my world at that point.
In 1963, jackhammers began their work. Within a year, the marble and granite temple was gone, and Madison Square Garden was breaking ground. The grand cathedral-like space was replaced by a low-ceilinged, fluorescent-lit underground station buried beneath the garden. And the preservationists' voices became louder. In 1965, 2 years after demolition began, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission was established, giving the city the power to protect historic buildings from a similar fate. The new law would later help save Grand Central Terminal in the 1970s when it too faced the threat of demolition. Archaeological historian Vincent Scully once famously said, "One entered the city like a god, one scuttles in now like a rat." In 1971, Amtrak officially took control of Penn Station, making it the hub of its Northeast Corridor operations. And though gone, much of the original station can still be found today.
This space within the rotunda was that original space that you see in some of the historic photos of the original Penn Station, that really tall space filled with columns, that central waiting area that was really actually one of the largest spaces ever built in New York City's public spaces. What we have here is a set of stairs down to the platforms. This is part of the original Penn Station. Here you can see the brass handrail, which people today can still touch and feel, just like passengers did when the station opened back in 1910. Part of the columns from the original station still exist. There are columns that hold up the station as it exists today. They just happen to be clad with this metal sheeting.
Penn Station was a crowded mess. It was a problem in search of a solution. There were plans over the years to do something about the station, and ultimately in 1988, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan stepped in. His vision? Reclaim a piece of what was lost by transforming the neighboring James A. Farley Post Office, across the street from Penn Station, into a grand new train hall.
The initial Penn Station was designed by McKim, Reed & White and opened in 1910, but not long after they designed the Farley Building.
The building opened in 1912 and was the perfect location for a post office.
At that time, 40% of the mail came in and went out on Pennsylvania Railroad tracks. So the federal government decided, why not build our main post office right there?
Building a new train hall was a 30-year challenge, slowed by politics, Madison Square Garden's lease extension, and high costs. When Moynihan died in 2003, the project lost momentum. Recovery from 9/11 and the 2008 financial crisis delayed it further. It wasn't until the 2010s that then-Governor Andrew Cuomo revived the plan with a public-private partnership. The architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill designed the modern train hall. Known for the old Sears Tower, One World Trade Center, and the Burj Khalifa, they had been part of the project for years, first brought on in 1998 to help reimagine the space.
This is the main train hall with the massive vaulted skylights and the large trusses. I think there's 500 plates of glass in the skylights. During World War II, the skylights that used to illuminate the historic mail sorting facility were covered over. It was a wonderful opportunity for us to honor the history of the steel structures and the great craft that went into them.
It turns out the trusses served another purpose in the history of the building.
A person is about this big, and this is where those security folks would walk in the truss and be able to look down to make sure that nobody was stealing anything out of the public's mail.
Coming up,
You see the brightness of the sky, you can see the stars at night through this skylight. You really know you've arrived in New York City.
Today, Penn Station is a mix of modern upgrades and ongoing construction, with new corridors and fresh spaces transforming the daily commute. But Moynihan Train Hall is not the only change Penn Station has undergone. After 27 months of construction and a $414 million investment, Penn Station's Long Island Railroad concourse got a facelift.
Where we're standing right now is our main Long Island Railroad entry hall. If you look this way, that's where the old main gate board used to be, where customers would come in, and everybody would stand underneath this gate board, and they'd sit there, and if you remember, everybody would huddle up, and it would create this congestion. So now, if you look at all the screens, we've put our gate boards on the screens, we've spread them around, so it creates this natural flow and circulation of customers to be able to stand in different areas of the station and not get so crowded and congested where it creates these bottlenecks for customers to not be able to circulate around the station. We nearly doubled the height of the ceilings, and we nearly doubled the width of the concourse. Because we're so down below grade, we wanted to bring in this feeling of natural light and fresh air coming in.
The station even features a brand new entryway designed by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, the same firm behind Moynihan Train Hall, bringing natural light, expanded access, and a modernized gateway to Penn Station.
We created this East End Gateway entrance because more than 70% of our customers that travel through Penn use the 7th Avenue entrance. The entrance was positioned with the iconic Empire State Building, literally almost the focal point of the entrance.
In 2019, when the station underwent the renovation, all of the businesses below ground were moved out, but they came back, including a few icons.
Rose's Pizza, everybody knows Rose's Pizza. One of the first retailers that came back after the renovation was complete.
and tracks.
Tracks was amazing. It just was a melting pot. You'd have union guys hanging out with Wall Street guys, people that take the Long Island Railroad, take the same train every day. Sometimes 5 days a week we'd see the same customers. We probably had 4 marriages that I know of come out of Tracks. Tracks is always known as the longest bar in the city, or I claimed it. So it's going to be returning in the same profile, the same footprint. I mean, I knew in my heart I would come back eventually.
Penn Station isn't just a train station, it's a crossroads. It's not the old Penn Station, and it never will be, but for the first time in decades, it feels like a station built for the people who actually use it.
You see the brightness of the sky, you can see the stars at night through this skylight. You really know you've arrived in New York City.
The greatest reward is to build something in a city where you know that millions of visitors will use this facility. It is a place for the public.